Hello, I'm Roger Watson, and this session is about understanding the publishing process. Now, the publishing process is something that goes on once your article has been submitted. Some aspects of the publishing process take place before that. For example, we provide guidance for authors, and they're a very important part of the publishing process. I've said this in subsequent presentations. Said it several times, I'll say it again. So the guidance is part of the publishing process, and it's very important, and the guidance will tell you everything you need to know about publishing in a particular journal. It will tell you about the aims and the scopes and so forth, and it will also tell you what to expect and what you need to make sure you check off in your manuscript. So to some extent the guidance for authors is part of the publication process, and we do continually update this, at least annually, but we update it on an ad hoc basis when we find that things need to be changed. And that's usually because further down the line in the rest of the process something's not clear, or it's gone wrong, or an author has pointed out that something's inconsistent. Anyway, what I really want to talk about though is not about the guidance so much. I've talked about that at length already. What I want to talk about is the process that takes place once your article is submitted. And I think this is helpful. The more that you understand about the process, the more that you will be able to, I think, address the things that you're asked to do for your paper, like revisions and looking at proofs and so forth. But just for your information, because some people I think don't realise there is actually a process. I think they think the paper just goes into a sort of black hole. It might come out again published at the other end, but they don't really know what's happening in that black hole. Well, let me make it clear to anybody who doesn't understand the publishing process. It's very far from a black hole. It's a very structured process, and it doesn't matter which journal or to which publisher you turn, you will find great similarities between the processes. One of the most important parts of the process is what happens when you initially submit your paper. And of course, submitting the paper is very much part of the process. All submissions are done online these days, and you must follow what you're requested to do during that online process. And for example, in my own journal, just a very simple thing, people will do things like putting the tables and the figures within the text. We don't want that. The figures and the tables should be out of the text, and not only should they be uploaded separately, or they should be uploaded individually. So if you've got 5 tables and 2 figures, there should be 7 additional files for those elsewhere in the process. Take them out of the manuscript altogether. Sometimes people put them at the end of the manuscript. We don't really want them there either. It doesn't help production if the paper is finally accepted. So one of the common things I have to do is to ask people to shift the tables out at the beginning of the process. So just a thought. Some very few journals will request you or allow you to put the tables in the actual text, but it's very rare. Certainly the major Elsevier and Wiley journals with which I've worked don't allow it. So part of that process is you getting things right at this stage of submitting your article. And the systems are a little bit difficult to use, I have to say. They can be quite time consuming, but they're actually quite clever. They will not let you submit the paper if some fundamental errors are made or if some files are missing, for example. So you know, you've got to often go back and correct things. Most of these online systems will allow you to stop halfway through, save what you've done and come back to it later. So don't panic if you don't get everything done on time, but do set aside a reasonable amount of time as part of the process. So I haven't got into the process yet, but here's the process. Once you press the button and your paper is submitted, if everything has gone right and you've checked the PDF to make sure it's what you thought it would be for submission, you will receive an email acknowledging that the paper has been submitted. Excuse me. So that email will give you a number. It will give you a manuscript number, So it'll have an acronym for the journal. For example, mine is YNEPR. Then it'll have a year, 23, and then it will have a number, and it's the number of the manuscript in that year. You must keep that number and note it, because it's the only way, it's the only sure way that if you correspond with me as editor-in-chief, that I can find your article. I have actually had emails from people asking what has happened to my article, and sometimes they don't even have a name at the bottom of the email. I say, I haven't got one, I don't know who you are, and two, I don't know what your manuscript's about. And sometimes people will give the title of the manuscript. Well, that's not really much use either, because there are lots of similarities in titles. Keep that number. That's very much part of the process, and that number will follow your manuscript all the way through to the proof stage and publication. So the first part of the process is that the system throws this number out to you, and you should keep that, and that's your confirmation that the paper is now in the system. Now, next, depending on the publisher, there are two slightly different processes that take place. After that, it's completely similar across all publishers. In my last publisher, which was Wiley, the first person to see the manuscript, once you had, as I say, pressed the button and submitted it, was me as editor-in-chief. Came straight to me, and I would make a decision there and then, or whenever I opened the inbox, I'd make a decision as to whether that manuscript would go forward into the review process or be rejected, or have some adjustments made to it. So that system was very quick indeed. You'd often get a rejection within 24 hours or maybe within the same day. However, in Elsevier, the system is slightly different. The article goes to an assistant who checks it for several things, like viruses. They look for similarity. They look to see if it is generally structured correctly. They don't engage with the details of the paper. They look to see if it's within the length. One or two things that we ask them to check off, and then it will come to me. So there's a slight delay before it gets to the editor-in-chief, and that delay can be anything up to a week or so. So in the Wiley system, I send the paper on to an assistant to have those things checked once I think it's okay, and they will deal with you. In this system, in the Elsevier system, the assistant will deal with you before it comes to me. So you will not hear from me immediately in nurse education and practice, whereas if you submit to the Journal of Advanced Nursing or Journal of Clinical Nursing, you will hear almost immediately from the editor-in-chief. So just a slight difference in the system. After that, the systems are virtually identical. The decision that I have to make after that is that the paper is, I think, is suitable, at least for review. I don't make a decision about the publication. I think it's suitable for review, and I will send it forward to one of my handling editors, sometimes subject specific, sometimes not, sometimes method specific, sometimes not, depending on the volume of papers. It's quite hard to match them exactly. The paper will go forward to the editor, and the editor has the autonomy to say, actually, I don't think this paper is good enough. They will read it in detail before they put it out to a reviewer, and they might think it's not suitable, and they have autonomy to reject it. They don't have to ask me, they don't have to come back to me to do that. So it may be rejected after that, but of course I'm talking perhaps about, I would say, maybe 50 to 70% of the papers that come to me are rejected immediately. Maybe another 5% or so are rejected by the editors, and then another 5% or so are rejected after review. So there's a large amount rejected at the beginning, smaller, and then a smaller amount later on. So the editors are less likely to reject your paper, but they may well do. So the next part of the process is the editors will select reviewers, at least 2, but sometimes 3 reviewers. If there's a statistical reviewer needed, they'll be the 3rd reviewer. Send it out for review after they've found reviewers, which can take quite a long time. And then the papers will eventually, manuscripts will eventually come back to them with the reviewers' recommendations. The reviewers don't make the decision, they make recommendations. The editors then have to look at those recommendations and then decide whether to give the author the opportunity to review the paper, to revise the paper or not. So that's the next part of the process. It's gone from me to an editor, out to reviewers, back again to the editor, and they may ask for it to be revised. It may go through the system again. It won't come back to me. And after it's been revised, we try not to put things out more than once for revision, twice at the very most. After that, the editor will make a decision as to whether it's going to be accepted or rejected. Most of the time it will be accepted. So once the paper is accepted, it's gone from me to an editor, out to reviewers, back to the editor, and then they've decided it's going to be accepted. It comes back to me, and I will edit the paper at that point. It will have been edited during the process, but I will have a thorough read and a very close edit of that paper, getting it into house style, getting rid of any extra words that you haven't got rid of yourself, doing all the things that I talked about, trying to iron out what I consider to be poor writing style. Once I'm happy with it, then the paper will be accepted. I will press a button that will say accept, and that's the last I will have to do with the paper. It goes off to a production process. Now I'm finished with it and the editors are finished with it then, but you're not finished with it, because the production team will turn your paper into a proof which you have to look at and read and correct. What they will also do almost immediately, sometimes at least within about 24 hours, when I've pressed the accept button, they will put up the accepted version of your paper online with a DOI, a digital object identifier. So your paper will in fact be published almost as soon as I've accepted it, but it's not the final version. It's the accepted version, and it says that. It says this is not the final corrected version. But it's available with the same DOI and it can be referred to. So that gets your paper published as quickly as possible, and it gets it read and people can start citing it. However, there's another process carries on whereby it's turned into a proof which looks like your paper. You must read that very, 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 very carefully, because it's the last chance that you will get to correct your paper. Once it's finally published online, nothing can change in the paper. All we can do if there's a mistake is to issue some sort of addendum or an erratum or a corrigendum. There are different expressions for it alongside the paper, but the actual paper can't be changed. So it's worth spending a great deal of time making sure the proof is correct. Sometimes it's worth getting someone else to look at your paper because it's difficult to proofread your own writing. And to some extent the process is finished there. But beyond that, for example, we have a Twitter site. I know that in China Twitter's not available, but we have a Twitter site, and I will put the paper up on Twitter, and it will be retweeted and people will pay attention to it there. That's a very effective way of getting your paper out and cited. You know, we'll do things like that to promote the paper. And then hopefully the paper will be read and cited and will contribute to our citations and help us with our impact factor. So the process is that you read the guidance, you submit the paper, it's looked at by someone, myself or an assistant, to make sure it's okay. Once that process is finished, it goes to an editor, it goes out to reviewers, back to the editor, revised. It may go to the reviewers again, come back again, hopefully only once. If it's rejected at that stage, that's the end of the process. But if it's accepted, it comes back to me. I edit the paper, close edit it, I send it off to the production team, who immediately make it available online in the final accepted version. And at the same time, the paper goes on into a proof stage. You should read the proof carefully, correct anything in it. It's the last opportunity you'll get. And then in a short time after that, the paper will be allocated to a volume and published. And of course, the publishing, we haven't talked about open access publishing, but that publishing can be open access. You can pay to make the paper open access so that you own the copyright, or it may just be published in the traditional way. We operate a hybrid system. So I cannot think of anything else to tell you about the publishing process in this short time available. As ever, I hope you found that useful, and thank you very much indeed for listening.